even in moments of sadness and anger, and I feel both here, I am honored to be a member of this body. I'm particularly honored to be a member of the United States Senate with Joe Manchin, whose bipartisanship and willingness to listen and to compromise and be reasonable is almost legendary. But all of us, including Ranking Member Wyden of the Finance Committee, have been more than eager to be reasonable and compromise and seek bipartisan solutions. His leadership on this issue, I truly want to salute and thank him for his insight and his great commitment to the public interest. We had a hearing just earlier this week before the Armed Services Committee about future threats to our nation in national security, with a panel of experts who testified that more than $1 trillion, maybe trillions, would be necessary for us to invest in the future of our nation's defense. And so many of us asked them whether they thought it would be possible to make that investment at the same time that our nation is about to go an additional $1.5 trillion in debt as a result of this misguided, malign scam, this tax bill. And when we asked that question, they shook their heads no. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, once said, famously now, the greatest threat to our national security is our national debt. And the reason that our national debt is a threat to our national security is very simply that it prevents us from the kind of commitment and investment on national defense that we on the Armed Services Committee and we in this body and we as the people of America know we have to make to secure our national defense. And our national defense is about more than just hardware and even great troops that we deploy. Our servicemen and women serve and sacrifice with such incredible bravery and dedication and patriotism. It is also about the quality of our society, whether we are equal, whether we give people the mobility to move and make of themselves what their aspirations are and make the American dream real in their lives and develop those skills through education and skill training that are so necessary to us as a nation. We can't produce the submarines and the F-35s and all of the extraordinary complex hardware that we do without that skill training. We know in Connecticut because we produce submarines and jet engines and helicopters. We're proud of it, but we need more people with those skills. And yet, this measure will enhance the divisions in our society. It will divide us from each other as Americans. It will diminish the mobility, social and economic mobility in our great nation. And it will increase economic insecurity, not make Americans more sure about their society or more confident in its equality and justice. It will create more anxiety and anger because at its core, this measure is about benefits to a tiny, minute fraction of America. Most of the benefits of this measure go there. And it is about hitting the rest of Americans, particularly middle-class families, with initial benefits that may even look good initially, but are a classic bait and switch because most of those middle-class families will be worse off over the next 10 years. Anybody earning between $50,000 and $75,000 will taxes increase for them over those years. And for all the reasons that my colleagues have so powerfully and compellingly outlined, in this chamber with statistics that I don't even have time to repeat here. This measure is essentially rotten at the core in its claim to fairness. Tax reform should be about making our tax code simpler and fairer. This measure does just the opposite. My colleagues may say there were hearings, but compared to the mid-1980s when the last major tax reform was passed, there have been no hearings. There's been no real markup. We are now considering an amendment that was deposited on the floor of this chamber just minutes ago, barely an hour, and will receive no serious scrutiny or oversight. And it will harm our teachers and first responders, our police and our firefighters, who will have less support for their vital services. It will harm the job creators who need more resources invested in infrastructure. It will harm our educators and the skilled trainers. And it will harm middle-class America. It will hit Connecticut as hard or harder than any other state because of the non-deductibility of state and local taxes and because of the non-deductibility of casualty losses. The homeowners whose foundations are crumbling will lose the ability to deduct the costs of repairs that they must make. That is so fundamentally unfair that it belies the promises that have been made even this day on this floor. We are adopting this measure literally in the dark of night, a Friday night when few Americans may be aware of what is happening here, comparatively few. On the pass-through provision that's been added to this bill, unquestionably, some Americans will be aware, including the President of the United States. He has more than 500 LLCs as part of his organization that will benefit from this pass-through provision. So the President may be celebrating, but most Americans will rue this day. We will remember this day, all of us who are here, but we in this chamber will rue it as well. We will remember it because of the black mark on our democracy that resulted from a guilty plea from a former national security advisor. A guilty plea for lying to the FBI, a black mark on our democracy, a sad day for our nation, and a shattering moment for this administration, the Trump presidency. But we will remember it also as a self-inflicted wound for our democracy when the actions of the United States Senate drove deeper divisions within our society, created more insecurity, enlarged the anger and angst and anxiety that people feel about themselves, and when we added $1.5 trillion to the national debt that our children and our grandchildren will pay, and when thereby we diminished our national security. The national debt may not be the greatest threat to our national security, but it is one of the largest of the dangers to our national security, and we are doing nothing to alleviate it. On the contrary, we are adding to it, and that is a shame and a disgrace. Thank you, Mr. President.